After the defeat of the Franco-Spanish fleet at Trafalgar in 1805, the remnants of the French fleet sought refuge in ports like Brest, Lorient, and Basque Roads, a sheltered bay in western France along the Bay of Biscay. The Royal Navy maintained a relentless blockade of Napoleon's fleet, aiming to prevent any ships from breaking out into the Atlantic and linking up with other forces. Despite the destruction of the Franco-Spanish fleet at Trafalgar, this remained a real threat, as demonstrated by two sizable squadrons that escaped from Brest in late 1805 and early 1806. In early 1809, the biggest challenge for a blockading fleet struck: a storm. On February the 21st, strong winds forced the British blockading ships off station, allowing Rear Admiral Jean-Baptiste Philibert Willaumez to slip past his opponent with 8 ships of the line. His orders were to collect the remaining ships of the line in the Atlantic ports and head for the Caribbean, where he had to defend the lucrative French-held island of Martinique from an imminent British invasion. Initially, the Royal Navy suspected that Willaumez would immediately head into the Atlantic, but instead the French admiral sailed south to Lorient, where he successfully gathered 5 more ships. Willaumez then headed for the anchorage of Basque Roads, encountering the small blockading force of Sir Robert Stopford along the way, but he refused to engage these enemy ships, heading straight for the sheltered bay instead. Upon learning this, the Admiralty dispatched Admiral Lord James Gambier and the Channel Fleet to blockade the combined French force. Gambier was ordered to destroy the French fleet with the use of fire ships suggested as a possible method. However, Gambier, a devoutly Christian man who had spent much of the last decade ashore, opposed the use of fire ships, describing them as unchristian. Frustrated with Gambier's hesitation, the First Lord of the Admiralty, Lord Mulgrave, summoned Captain Lord Thomas Cochrane to London. Cochrane, known for his bold actions as a frigate commander in the Mediterranean, was asked to lead the fireship attack against the French fleet. Cochrane, always at odds with his superiors, feared that this action might worsen his relationship with them. However, he eventually accepted the assignment and rapidly sailed south aboard the frigate HMS Impérieuse of 38 guns to join Lord Gambier's fleet. Upon his arrival at Basque Roads, Cochrane was warmly welcomed by Gambier, but faced hostility from senior captains. Meanwhile, on the French side, Vice Admiral Zachary Allemande had assumed command of the French fleet. Willaumez had been removed from command by the Minister of Marine Denis Decrès, infuriated by the Admiral's inability to destroy the numerically inferior force of Sir Robert Stopford and his inability to sail across the Atlantic. Vice Admiral Allemande repositioned his ships south of Ile d'Aix, protected by the Boyard Shoal to the west and a defensive boom to the northwest. Cochrane quickly assessed the situation and recommended converting several transports into explosion and fire ships. Although work on 3 explosion ships progressed, Cochrane had to wait for 20 fire ships to arrive on April the 10th. Anxious to strike, he requested permission to attack immediately, but Gambier denied this, seriously frustrating Cochrane. Vice Admiral Allemande, spotting the fire ships offshore, ordered his vessels to reduce exposed flammable material by striking their topmasts and sails. He also deployed frigates and small boats to defend against the fire ships. Despite losing the element of surprise, Cochrane was granted permission to attack that night, supported by the frigates HMS Unicorn, Pallas and Aigle. Leading the attack, Cochrane personally sailed one of the explosion ships, aiming to break the boom and create chaos among the French. Though his ship detonated prematurely, the explosions caused confusion, with the French fleet mistakenly firing on their own frigates. Cochrane's fireship attack was disorganized, and only 4 out of the 20 fireships reached the French anchorage, causing little material damage. However, fearing that all the fire ships were explosion ships, the French fleet slipped their cables to escape but ran aground. By dawn, Cochrane saw how the French fleet was in complete disarray, with most ships disabled. At 5:48 a.m., Cochrane signaled Gambier that the French ships were in a vulnerable state and that an immediate attack would be the best thing to do. Gambier received the signal but did not act. A speedy decision, however, was of the utmost importance, since high tide was approaching, allowing the French to refloat their ships. The disillusioned Cochrane took matters into his own hands and sailed into Basque Roads with HMS Impérieuse. Engaging 3 grounded French ships of the line, he requested Gambier's assistance, and finally, by 1:45 p.m., 2 ships of the line and 7 frigates from the Channel Fleet approached. The British quickly overwhelmed the French. First, Calcutta of 54 guns surrendered to Cochrane, and later the third-raters Aquilon and Ville de Varsovie followed suit around 5:30 p.m. The French ship Tonnerre was scuttled by her crew, and several smaller vessels were burned as well. As night fell, the surviving French ships were able to retreat to the river Charente. Cochrane prepared to continue the attack at dawn, but was furious to learn that Gambier had recalled the fleet. Unable to persuade the other ships to stay, Cochrane, ever audacious, prepared his relatively small Impérieuse for an assault on Allemand's flagship, the Océan, of 118 guns, with the aim of forcing Gambier to come to his aid again. Gambier, however, has had enough of this disobedient captain and repeated his orders, forcing the reluctant Cochrane to comply and withdraw. The Battle of Basque Roads was the last major naval engagement of the Napoleonic Wars. It resulted in the destruction of 4 French ships of the line and a frigate. These were good numbers by any standard, certainly given the lack of cooperation from the admiral. Nevertheless, in the indomitable spirit of Lord Nelson himself, total destruction was only on Cochrane's mind. Upon his return to the fleet, the dissatisfied Cochrane pressed Gambier to resume the attack, but was instead sent back to Britain with dispatches. In Britain, Cochrane was celebrated as a hero and made a knight companion of the Order of the Bath, but he remained outraged at the lost opportunity to annihilate the French fleet. He entirely and justifiably so put all the blame on Gambier and would do everything in his power to hold the man accountable. As a member of parliament, Cochrane refused to support a vote of thanks for Gambier. This open act of insubordination and disrespect to a high-ranking officer effectively ended his own naval career. In response to criticism over his inaction, Gambier sought a court-martial to clear his name. In a rigged trial, in which evidence was withheld and charts were altered, Gambier was acquitted. Cochrane, probably Britain's most brilliant naval commander at that time, the only one with the audacity to follow in Nelson's footsteps, left England and sought his fortune elsewhere. Be that as it may, the Battle of the Basque Roads was Britain's final answer to France's naval ambitions. Britannia had been ruling the waves and will continue to do so. Naval supremacy was reaffirmed, be it in an imperfect and controversial manner. France would never again challenge its nemesis on the seas again. Out of centuries of naval combat grew a strange situation. Seas and oceans without the British and the French having a heated debate somewhere by the grace of their guns. The irony of history would even see to it that in the end, the British and the French would start fighting alongside each other.